Get out. This place isn't for your kind." The words cracked across the dining room like glass breaking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to lips. Heads turned, one by one, toward the corner table where a man in a gray suit was pointing a rigid finger at a woman standing calmly before him. She wore a plain navy blouse, no jewelry, no designer logo, nothing to suggest she belonged in a place wrapped in polished oak and soft candlelight. But her posture, straight spine, steady gaze was louder than any wardrobe. The man's voice rose again, sharper this time, heavy with disdain. "I said out. Now, don't make me repeat myself." His jaw strained. A vein in his temple pulsed. He wasn't whispering. He wanted everyone to hear. A ripple moved through the restaurant. At the bar, a couple of businessmen swiveled on their stools. A woman at the next table clutched her pearls. Even the servers slowed, their trays hovering, unsure whether to step forward or step back. The target of his fury, a black woman in her 30s, standing still, not flinching, not bowing. She didn't argue, she didn't plead, she simply held his stare, as if his words had passed through her without landing. The room, however, felt every syllable. "Not for your kind." It stung like smoke in the eyes. A couple in the corner exchanged uneasy glances. One young man, phone already in his hand, whispered, "This doesn't look right," and tapped record. The manager, the man in gray, straightened his tie as if tightening his grip on authority. "We have standards here," he sneered. "People like you don't just walk into our VIP section uninvited. Show me proof you belong or walk out." His words weren't about policy, they were about power, and everyone knew it. The woman finally spoke. Not loud, not rushed, just a single sentence, dropped into the charged silence. "Check who I am first." Her voice was even, almost gentle, but it sliced the air like a blade. Several guests stiffened. One woman gasped. The man in gray blinked, then barked a humorless laugh. "Enough games, we don't need imposters here to ruin the atmosphere." He turned his head toward a waiter. "Call security. Now." The waiter hesitated, eyes darting between the man's flushed face and the woman's calm expression. His grip tightened on the notepad, but his feet wouldn't move. The woman did not step back, did not blink. Her silence was its own gravity, pulling every eye in the restaurant toward her. This was no longer just a disagreement over a table. It was a trial staged in public view. And the verdict, though not yet spoken, was already forming in the minds of everyone watching. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now back to her, because the storm had only begun. The room was still tense when she finally pulled out the chair and sat down not as a guest, but as someone claiming her ground. Her name was Danielle Carter, though nobody in the restaurant seemed to realize it yet. She had walked in alone 20 minutes earlier. No entourage. No designer handbag dangling from her wrist. No security detail shadowing her steps. Just a navy blouse tucked into simple black slacks and a face composed like stone. If anything, her clothes made her blend in with the waitstaff. And maybe that was the point, because Danielle had built her empire by watching how people treated her when they thought she had nothing. The maitre d' barely looked up when she first approached the front desk. "Reservation?" he asked, already typing, already half dismissive. Danielle gave him her last name. He frowned, shook his head, and muttered something about system glitches. Then, with a smile that wasn't a smile, he waved her toward the bar. "You can wait over there. VIP tables are full tonight." She didn't argue. She simply moved toward the reserved section anyway, her stride calm, each step measured. A couple of guests glanced at her, puzzled. They saw no expensive jewelry, no high-end brand stitched into fabric, and in their eyes that was enough to place her at the margins. Danielle had seen those eyes before. At 22, fresh from grad school, she tried to order champagne at a rooftop bar in Manhattan to celebrate her first investment deal. The bartender told her flatly, "That's not for you. Stick to the specials." She remembered walking out that night and promising herself she would never let someone else's doubt set her ceiling. Now, years later, she sat in a restaurant she financed, with a staff she technically employed, and the same script was playing again. Across the room, the gray-suited manager puffed his chest like he owned the air itself. He had no idea that the woman he was trying to eject signed his paycheck every month. Danielle folded her hands in her lap, her silence radiating control. She wasn't there to flash power like a trophy. She was there to see how deep the prejudice ran when there was no spotlight, no announcement of her name. And the result? She didn't need to search for it. It came right to her in the form of his barked command, "Get out. This place isn't for your kind." That was the test, and he had already failed. The dining room hadn't recovered. The guests were whispering now, some leaning in, others shaking their heads. One teenager at a corner table mouthed the words, "This is crazy," while secretly recording from behind a glass of soda. Danielle didn't look at them. She didn't need their sympathy. Not yet. She needed the storm to keep brewing, because storms had a way of revealing the weakest foundations. The hum of conversation had barely begun to crawl back when another figure appeared, a hostess in a tight black dress, tablet in hand, lips pressed into a line sharp enough to cut. She walked over, heels clicking like a countdown, and stopped just short of Danielle's table. "Ma'am," she said, her tone lined with ice, "this section is reserved for premium guests only. If you'd like, I can escort you to the bar area where you'll be more comfortable." The word comfortable landed like an insult. It wasn't hospitality, it was dismissal wrapped in velvet. Danielle lifted her eyes slowly, calm, unflinching. "Check your system," she said evenly. "Carter, reservation." The hostess tilted her head, thumbs moving across her screen, and then her brow furrowed theatrically. "Strange," she muttered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I don't see a Carter here. Perhaps you booked the wrong location." Her smirk wasn't subtle. It was a performance, designed to validate the man in gray still looming nearby. A murmur rolled through the room. At the corner table, the teenager's phone was still up, the red light blinking. A middle-aged couple whispered, the wife tugging at her husband's sleeve. "This doesn't feel right." The manager stepped closer, sensing blood in the water. "You heard her. No Carter here. That should settle it." He leaned down, voice lowered but sharp enough to sting. "Don't embarrass yourself further." Danielle didn't move. Her silence was heavier than his volume. The hostess pressed again, this time louder, each word delivered for the audience, not the guest. "Do you even have proof you belong here? Because anyone can say Carter." A sharp inhale rippled across the dining room. Proof. Belong. Words dressed as policy but dripping with something uglier. Danielle finally placed her phone flat on the table, her hand steady. She didn't raise her voice, didn't break cadence. "Run the name again," she said. The manager chuckled, dismissive. "She already did. You're wasting everyone's time." He turned, gesturing at the bar where two men in suits sipped whiskey. "Real clients are waiting." One of the men frowned, setting down his glass. "Let her speak," he muttered, but his voice was swallowed by the manager's next command. "Security." The word cracked the air, heavier than the first insult. Heads turned toward the entrance, waiting for a guard that hadn't even been summoned yet. The implication alone was enough. She wasn't just unwelcome, she was being marked as a threat. The teenager's phone trembled slightly in his grip. He whispered, "They're calling security on her for sitting down." His friend hissed back, "Keep filming. People need to see this." Danielle breathed once, slow and measured. She had seen this stage before. At 26, she had walked into a hotel lobby in Los Angeles, reservation in hand, only to be told the suite she booked had been mysteriously reassigned. That night, she slept in her rental car. That memory sharpened her now. The manager leaned closer, lips curled. "Last chance. Leave quietly or be removed." But Danielle didn't rise. She didn't blink. The storm was still gathering, and she knew exactly where it was headed. Daniela didn't flinch. The word security had just been dropped into the air like a match in dry grass, but she sat there as if rooted, spine straight, hands folded neatly on the table. Her stillness wasn't weakness, it was defiance in disguise. The hostess shifted uneasily, glancing back at the manager. She had expected shouting, pleading, some proof of guilt. Instead, silence. A silence that unsettled more than protest ever could. "Do you hear me?" the manager barked, leaning in closer. "Leave. Now." His breath carried the heat of command, but his eyes flickered with a sliver of doubt. Danielle's gaze didn't waver. She spoke only 4 words, low and precise. "Check again. Reservation, Carter." The quietness in her tone cut sharper than any yell. It was steady, it was measured, and it stripped his authority of momentum. From the bar, a man muttered to his date, "She's too calm." He's going to regret this. The woman nodded, eyes fixed on Danielle like she was watching a verdict about to be delivered. The manager sneered, turning his frustration into volume. You're stalling. Security's on the way. People like you don't belong in places like this. The phrase landed heavy. People like you. Guests exchanged glances. One young woman near the window whispered, "Did he really just say that out loud?" Her friend nodded grimly. Danielle lowered her eyes briefly to the glass of water placed in front of her by a hesitant waiter. She lifted it, took a slow sip, and set it back down with deliberate care. That single act, drinking water in the face of hostility, felt like a declaration. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't rattled. The teenager in the corner whispered into his phone, "She's not even moving. They're shouting at her and she's just still." The red record light glowed brighter against the polished wood. Inside Danielle's mind, another memory surfaced. Age 24, waiting in line at a high-end boutique, she had cash in hand for her first luxury purchase. The clerk skipped over her 3 times, serving customers behind her, until she finally left without buying. She didn't raise her voice then either. She just remembered, and built, now, sitting under the warm glow of chandeliers and the cold glare of prejudice. She remembered again, and chose silence, because silence forced everyone else to confront their own noise. The manager's voice cracked. "You're embarrassing yourself." Danielle looked up at him, calm, almost pitying. "No," she said softly. "I'm giving you the chance to fix it." The words slipped into the room like smoke, curling into every corner. Guests stirred. Someone at the back let out a low whistle. The hostess hugged her tablet closer to her chest. For the first time, her confidence wavered. She glanced at Danielle, then at the manager, as if weighing which one truly held control of the room. Danielle didn't push further. She didn't need to. She simply returned to stillness, hands folded again, eyes steady. The choice now belonged to them, but the power, unmistakably, was hers. And in that charged quiet, the restaurant felt less like a dining room and more like a courtroom, with every guest a witness. The silence around Danielle was thick enough to choke, but it didn't last long. A voice, small but steady, cut through it. From the corner booth, a teenager with curly hair raised his phone higher. "I'm filming this," he whispered, then louder, for everyone to hear. "People need to see how she's being treated." The words landed like a spark, heads swiveled. The glow of phone screens multiplied, first 1, then 2, then half a dozen. The restaurant, moments ago an elegant cocoon, now buzzed with a quiet tension that felt less like fine dining and more like a live broadcast. The manager froze for a beat, realizing the stage had grown larger than his control. Then his anger flared brighter. "Put that phone away," he snapped at the teenager. "This is private property." But the boy didn't lower his hand. His friend leaned forward, voice shaky but firm. "If it's private, then why are you yelling loud enough for everyone to hear?" A ripple of murmurs ran through the tables. A woman in a red dress shook her head, her voice edged with disbelief. "She gave her name. You didn't even check properly." Her date hushed her, but his own eyes stayed locked on the scene unfolding. Danielle hadn't moved. Her stillness had become magnetic, drawing words out of strangers who couldn't bear the weight of silence any longer. At the bar, one of the whiskey-drinking men muttered to the bartender, "She's handling this better than I ever could. Calm like that? That's power." The hostess clutched her tablet tighter, her fingers trembling slightly now. She opened her mouth, perhaps to double down, but the noise from the guests drowned her out. "Why is he talking to her like that?" someone whispered near the window. "This feels wrong," another replied, not bothering to whisper at all. Danielle's gaze flicked briefly toward the teenager holding the phone. For a moment, their eyes met. He looked ready to speak again, to throw his voice against the storm. But Danielle gave the slightest shake of her head, a signal, a reminder. "Not yet." The boy hesitated, then slowly lowered the phone, though the red recording light stayed on. The manager scoffed, misreading the moment. "See? Even they know this is nonsense." His laugh rang hollow, bouncing against walls lined with framed art and polished mirrors. But the mirrors betrayed him. They showed faces, dozens of them, staring not at Danielle but at him, judging, doubting. Danielle finally spoke again, her voice calm, almost tender. "Every word you've said is already logged." She wasn't looking at the manager when she said it. She was looking at the room, at the guests, at the witnesses who now carried pieces of the story in their phones, their whispers, their memory, and in that instant, the balance shifted. The restaurant was no longer his stage. It was a jury box, and every eye was waiting for the next move. The man in the gray suit, the manager, straightened his shoulders, as if the murmurs in the room were an audience he had to win back. His face flushed red, but his voice grew colder, sharper, each word honed like a blade. "She's wasting everyone's time," he declared, sweeping his arm toward Danielle as though presenting an intruder on stage. "This isn't a soup kitchen. This is a fine dining establishment. We don't tolerate frauds parading around like they belong." A hush fell heavy. His words weren't wrapped in pretense anymore. They were raw, bare, dripping contempt. Danielle didn't blink. She didn't even shift in her chair. The hostess flinched slightly, but the manager pressed harder, louder, making sure the whole restaurant heard. "You think showing up in a cheap blouse and muttering a name is enough to get a seat here? Look around." He gestured to the chandelier above, the crystal glasses, the gleaming oak panels. "This is luxury. This is not for people like you." The phrase cracked across the room like a whip. People like you. It wasn't coded anymore. It was naked. Gasps scattered through the tables. A woman in red snapped back, "That's enough." Her partner tugged her arm nervously, but she didn't stop. "She gave you her name. You didn't check once. We all heard it." The manager turned on her. "And who are you?" "A diner. Stay in your lane." His dismissal only deepened the unease. The teenager with the phone whispered fiercely, "This is messed up. He's doubling down." His friend nodded. "And it's all on video." At the bar, the man with the whiskey leaned toward his companion. "You hear him? That's not policy. That's prejudice." The hostess tried one last time to cover the cracks. "Sir, maybe we should—" "Quiet," the manager snapped at her. "She's not a guest. She's a problem, and problems get removed." He leaned closer to Danielle now, his shadow stretching across her table, words delivered like a sentence. "You have no reservation. You have no proof, and you will have no meal here. Not tonight. Not ever." His hand swept down toward her glass of water, gripping it like he might snatch it away, but stopped short, hovering. The threat was clear. "You don't even deserve this." Danielle finally looked up, her expression unreadable, her voice still calm. "Are you finished?" The restraint in her tone was louder than any outburst. Guests exchanged glances. The woman in red shook her head, whispering, "She's holding it together better than anyone here." But the manager smiled, as if mistaking her calm for surrender. "Yes, I'm finished. Security will handle the rest." He turned away, convinced he had written the ending. But what he didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that the real story had only just begun. The manager didn't just turn away, he lunged back to the hostess's tablet, snatching it from her hands with a force that made her gasp. He tapped rapidly, scrolling through the reservation list, then held the glowing screen high like a trophy. "Look!" he shouted, voice cracking with false triumph. "No Carter here, no record, nothing. This woman is lying, and she's trying to scam her way into our establishment." The room erupted in whispers. Guests craned their necks to see the screen, though none could read the small print from their seats. The message wasn't about proof, it was about humiliation. The teenager filming whispered, "He didn't even check properly before. Now he's performing." His phone trembled as he zoomed in. The hostess tried to interject. "Sir, if I could just—" But he cut her off, slamming the tablet down onto Danielle's table. The device skidded across the linen, rattling the cutlery. "Fraud," he spat, his voice thick with contempt. "You think you can walk in here with a fake reservation, sit in a premium seat and pretend you belong? Not on my watch." "Hubble." Gasps rippled. Someone near the window muttered, "This is going too far." Then, with deliberate venom, the manager reached for the folded slip of paper Danielle had placed earlier, her reservation confirmation. He snatched it up, held it between his fingers, and tore it clean down the middle. The sound of ripping paper carried across the dining room like a gunshot. Pieces fluttered to the table, fragments of proof scattered like ashes. "Done," he said flatly. "No reservation, no entry, no discussion." The room froze. Guests stared at the scraps, then at Danielle, waiting for her to break. But she didn't. She sat still, hands folded, eyes calm. The woman in red pushed back her chair, standing abruptly. "That's theft. She gave you her reservation." "Sit down," the manager barked. "You're not part of this." "Neither are you," the woman snapped back, but her partner tugged at her arm, terrified of escalation. The manager ignored her, reaching for the landline mounted on the wall. He punched in a code, lifted the receiver, and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Yes, this is the front manager. We have a trespasser, possible fraud, refusing to leave. Send security immediately." The words hit the room like cold steel. Trespasser, fraud, refusing to leave. He wasn't just ejecting her, he was criminalizing her presence. A man at the bar cursed under his breath. Calling security on a woman for sitting down? Unreal. His companion nodded, muttering, "This is going to backfire." The teenager whispered into his phone. He just called her a trespasser. She literally had a reservation. Danielle finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up one of the torn scraps from the table, studied it for a moment, then set it back down. Her voice, when it came, was low and unwavering. "You just destroyed evidence," she said. The manager laughed, hollow and brittle. "Evidence of what? A forgery?" Danielle leaned back, her calm spreading like ice over fire. "No. Evidence of how far you're willing to go to erase me." The room buzzed with murmurs. Guests shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads, others raising their phones higher. And in that moment, with the reservation torn, the call made, and the insult cemented, the tension in the restaurant reached its breaking point. The storm had arrived. The torn scraps of paper still clung to the linen like wounds when Danielle finally moved again. Slowly, she reached for her phone. No rush, no tremor, just deliberate precision like someone reaching not for rescue, but for confirmation. The room was hushed, everyone waiting for her to falter. But instead of pleading or defending herself, Danielle pressed one button and lifted the phone to her ear. "Nia," she said, her tone steady as stone. "Activate protocol. Begin full log. Timestamp everything from the moment he raised his voice." On the other end, a crisp female voice answered without hesitation. "Understood. System is live. Video feed syncing now. Do you want escalation to legal?" Danielle's gaze never left the manager's face. "Not yet. Just record, and flag this incident across all branches." The manager barked a laugh, mistaking calm for weakness. "Oh, she's calling someone now. Maybe her friend? Or a fake assistant? Lady, this isn't going to save you." But his voice wavered as several guests leaned in, whispering, "She has an assistant? What system is she talking about?" At the bar, the man with whiskey muttered, "That didn't sound like a bluff." His companion nodded. "No one says, flag across all branches unless they know exactly what they're doing." Danielle continued, her voice even, her eyes locked. "Nia, confirm my access remains active." The reply came clear enough for those nearby to hear. "Confirmed. Your executive credentials are live, all data secure." A ripple of unease washed over the room. The hostess glanced between Danielle and the manager, confusion tugging at her features. The manager tried to recover, puffing up his chest. "Credentials? Executive? What kind of act is this? You're nothing but a trespasser, and security will—" Danielle lifted a hand, silencing him without raising her voice. The gesture alone carried authority, like a gavel striking wood. "I'm not here to argue," she said, calm, unshaken. "I'm here to document." Those words pierced deeper than any defense. Document, evidence, record, the very things he had just tried to destroy. The teenager's voice rose from the corner, carried by the glow of his recording screen. She told her assistant to log everything. "This is bigger than he thinks." The manager turned sharply toward the boy. "Delete that video or I'll—" "You'll what?" Danielle cut in, her tone still measured but sharper now, honed. "Threaten him too? Add more witnesses to the list?" The room stilled. The phone stayed raised. The balance of power had shifted, if only slightly, and everyone could feel it. Danielle leaned back in her chair, phone still at her ear, her silence filling the space like a verdict yet to be spoken. This wasn't just defense anymore. It was the beginning of something larger, methodical, precise, unstoppable. And for the first time that night, the manager's confidence faltered. The restaurant had slipped into a strange silence. Not the comfortable hush of fine dining, but the tense quiet of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. Phones were still raised, guests still whispering, but all eyes were fixed on the woman at the center table. Danielle lowered her phone slowly, setting it on the white linen beside the torn scraps of her reservation. Her hands folded again, composed, deliberate. When she spoke, Her voice carried farther than its volume should have allowed. "You called me a fraud," she said, her tone measured, "in a place that exists because of me." The words landed like thunder in still air. The manager blinked, stunned for a split second, then barked a laugh. "Because of you? Lady, this restaurant has been here for years. You think you own this place?" He spread his arms to the chandeliers, the polished oak, the velvet-lined booths. "Look around you. Do you really think you belong here?" Danielle's gaze didn't waver. "Not think. No." She reached into her bag, not for ID, not for a wallet, but for a slim black folder. She laid it flat on the table and opened it with careful precision. Inside, neatly tucked, were embossed documents, the kind stamped with authority. She slid one page forward, her fingertip resting on the signature line. Gasps broke across the room. From 3 tables away, a woman whispered, That's the ownership deed." The hostess leaned in involuntarily, her face paling. There it was, in bold print, Danielle Carter, sole owner, Carter Dining Group. The manager's smirk faltered. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, searching for words that wouldn't come. Danielle's eyes locked on his. "You tore up my reservation. You called me a trespasser. You humiliated me in front of my own guests. And you did it because you decided, at a glance, that I didn't belong." The teenager filming nearly dropped his phone in shock. "She owns the place," he whispered hoarsely. His friend hissed, "Say it louder." And he did. His voice carried, "She owns the restaurant." The ripple was instant. Gasps, murmurs, chairs scraping as guests leaned forward. The woman in red let out a triumphant laugh. "I knew it." Danielle sat still, unflinching, letting the realization spread through the dining room like a wave breaking against stone. She didn't need to raise her voice, the truth was doing the work for her. The manager staggered back a step, color draining from his face. This is a mistake," he stammered. "Anyone can forge." "Careful," Danielle cut in, her tone sharper now, though still calm. "You've already destroyed one piece of evidence. Do you want to add slander to the record as well?" The words hit him harder than any shout. He froze, mouth half open, eyes darting to the phones aimed at him from every direction. Danielle leaned forward slightly, every syllable a blade. "You didn't just insult a guest tonight, you insulted your employer." And in that instant, the truth settled over the room like a heavy cloak. The balance of power had inverted completely. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The weight of Danielle's words and the deed glimmering under the chandelier's light hung over the room like a storm cloud. Then the chaos began. The hostess staggered back, clutching her tablet to her chest, her eyes wide. I didn't know," she stammered, voice cracking. "You never said—" Her words trailed off as she realized how thin they sounded against the truth printed in black ink. At the bar, the whiskey drinker slapped his palm against the counter and let out a bark of laughter. "She owns it. God, I knew something was off." His friend shook his head, muttering, "He's finished. Absolutely finished." The manager's face drained to a pale mask. His lips moved, trying to form a denial, but the sound never came. Instead, he looked around wildly, as if searching for someone, anyone, to back him up. But everywhere he turned, he saw phones raised, eyes fixed, witnesses recording his collapse in real time. The woman in red pushed back her chair and stood tall. She clapped once, sharply, the sound echoing, then again and again. Slowly, others joined, hesitant at first, then bolder, until the restaurant buzzed with applause. A few guests whistled. Some cheered. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief, the sound of vindication swelling like a tide. The teenager holding the phone whispered, almost reverent, "She flipped the whole room." His friend whispered back, "No, she owned it from the start." Servers stood frozen near the kitchen door, trays in hand, unsure whether to flee or step forward. One of them, a young waiter with sweat glistening on his temple, finally muttered, "Oh my God, she's my boss. She's our boss." His colleague shushed him, but the words had already slipped into the growing noise. The manager tried once more, his voice brittle, desperate. This can't be right. This is a trick. She's lying. She has to be." But his protest only made the crowd sharper. A guest near the window stood, pointing at the folder. "We all saw it. Her name's on the deed. You can't spin this." The manager's jaw clenched. He turned to Danielle, his voice shaking with rage he no longer controlled. Even if you are who you say you are, you came in here dressed like nothing. How are we supposed to know? Danielle's gaze locked on him, steady as steel. That was never the test, she said softly. The test was who you'd become when you thought I had nothing. The words slammed into him harder than any order could. His shoulders sagged, his mouth opened, closed, but no sound followed. And around him, the walls of power he thought were unshakable began to crumble, one clap, one whistle, one raised phone at a time. The restaurant wasn't his stage anymore. It was her court, and the verdict was already clear. The clapping faded into a tense silence again, but this time it wasn't born of fear. It was expectation. The entire room was waiting not for the manager, not for the staff, but for Danielle. She reached for her phone once more, her movement slow, deliberate, her calm, an unshakable anchor in the chaos. With a single press, she was connected. "Nia," she said, her voice as steady as ever. "Authorize termination. Effective immediately." On the other end, the reply came crisp and certain. "Name." Danielle's eyes never left the manager's. "Richard Hale, General Manager. Revoke access. Freeze credentials. Remove from payroll. Flag incident for legal audit." The manager's face twisted. "You can't do that." But even as he spoke, his own phone buzzed in his pocket. He fumbled it out, glanced at the screen, and froze. The color drained from his cheeks. The device flashed a single line in bold red. "Access denied." Gasps scattered across the restaurant. The hostess covered her mouth. The young waiter at the kitchen door whispered, "It's happening live." Danielle didn't stop. Her tone remained calm, surgical. And the hostess who stood by and enabled him. "Review her record. Pending suspension." The hostess's tablet vibrated violently in her hands. She stared down at the screen, watching as her login credentials blinked out, replaced by the same red denial. Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, I didn't—" But the words died in her throat. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others nodding in approval. Justice was unfolding not in courtrooms, not in back offices, but right here under the chandeliers. The manager tried to rally, his voice cracking. "You're humiliating me in front of everyone." Danielle leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp enough to cut. "No, you did that yourself. I'm just recording the final chapter." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the diners. Someone clapped again. Someone else whispered, "That's power. Quiet. Precise." Danielle gave her final order. "Escort him out. He no longer works here." The young waiter hesitated, then glanced around. Two more staff stepped forward, not with aggression, but with the weight of obedience. They moved to the manager's side. His face turned crimson as he jerked back. "You wouldn't dare," he spat. But the waiter met his eyes, voice low but firm. "Sir, you don't belong here anymore." The irony sliced through the room. A gasp, then scattered laughter, then a wave of murmurs that grew louder as Richard Hale realized what had just been said. His own words had come back, sharpened, and they cut deeper than he could bear. He stumbled back, his tie askew, his composure shattered, and for the first time all night, he had no power left to wield. Danielle sat motionless, hands folded, her silence heavier than any order. The punishment wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was final. The doors shut behind him with a hollow thud. The sound lingered like punctuation, the end of a sentence no one expected to hear tonight. Richard Hale, the man who moments ago barked orders like a judge in his own court, was gone. And in his place sat Danielle Carter, silent, steady, unshaken. The staff hovered uncertainly near the kitchen, their faces pale, their posture stiff. Some looked terrified, others looked relieved. Guests murmured in low voices, still clutching their phones, still replaying what they had just witnessed. A story that would spread far beyond the walls of this restaurant was already alive in pixels and whispers. Danielle rose slowly from her chair, not hurried, not triumphant, just deliberate, every movement measured. She rested her palm gently on the back of the chair she had occupied, then turned to face the room. Her voice carried without effort, calm, inevitable. "You thought I didn't belong here." The words floated across the chandeliers, into every corner, every ear. She paused, letting them settle like dust on polished wood. "But this entire place, every brick, every chair, every light above your head exists because of me." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of recognition, of shame, of awe. Guests shifted in their seats, some lowering their eyes, others staring at her as though seeing her for the first time. The teenager with the phone whispered into his mic, voice trembling with adrenaline. She just ended him. She ended the whole thing with one sentence. Danielle's gaze swept the room, not accusing, not demanding, simply present. Power, she said softly, doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove itself to people determined not to see. Power sits still and waits, and when the time is right, she let the words linger, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. It speaks once, and that is enough. The woman in red started clapping again, harder this time, tears shining in her eyes. Others followed, some slowly, some with relief, until the room filled with applause, not polite, not rehearsed, but raw. A release of tension, a recognition of dignity restored. Danielle inclined her head once, neither basking in it nor dismissing it. Then she gathered the folder from the table, slid the torn scraps of her reservation inside, and tucked it neatly under her arm. On her phone, Nia's voice returned. All logs complete. Legal flagged. Do you want me to forward the footage? Danielle's lips curved into the faintest smile. No, she said, her voice a whisper but carrying like thunder. I am the record. And with that, she turned, walking calmly toward the exit. The crowd parted, not because she demanded it, but because respect compelled it. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The story wasn't hers to tell anymore. It belonged to every witness in that room, every phone still recording, every voice already typing into the world. They tried to erase her. Instead, she erased them. And outside, under the night sky, Danielle Carter stepped into the air like it was hers, because in truth, it always had been.